Welcome to the Healing Grove podcast. I'm Dr. Kristin, an integrative holistic family physician, author of Life After Lyme, and host in this virtual space of learning, healing, and growing. I believe humans are like trees, and our physical limb is only one of many. Health on all limbs of the tree, emotional, conceptual, social, spiritual, is absolutely required for the whole tree that is you to be vibrantly well. I created the Healing Grove podcast as a place to showcase some of the world's best integrative and holistic medicine, to expose you to transformative tools and mindset shifts for all limbs of your tree. I hope you enjoy our conversation in the Healing Grove today as much as I enjoyed having it. Welcome, Summer MacCool.
Thank you, Kristin.
I'm so excited for this conversation. We've been waiting months to have it, so I'm grateful for your time and can't wait to see what emerges. But before we get into that, I want to introduce you. So everyone, this is my friend Summer MacCool. She is a conduit for universal consciousness in service to the world and to your extraordinary life. Transforming the formless into form is her magic. Summer contributes to everyone who steps into her light, and I can attest to that because I have stepped into her light, and she's an amazing human to be around, transformative just to be in the room with. So thank you, Summer, for being with us and sharing your wisdom with us today.
Thank you, Kristin. It's always an honor to be in space with you.
So before we get into it, this is an opportunity for us to speak from our hearts to people who are either struggling with complex chronic mystery illness or wanting to prevent that sort of thing and get even healthier. What draws you to want to offer anything to this population?
It's my understanding that as a soul, we are whole and complete. And nothing's wrong, nothing's broken. We already have everything we need. It's innately designed in like the human operating system to naturally rebalance within. And we don't necessarily have to know how to do that. So it's kind of like if you get a paper cut, we don't have to know how to fix it. Our bodies and have their own intelligence about that. The only thing we have to do is actually leave it alone. So what I know to be true is that we have everything we need for balance, for well-being, for health. And so what I like to offer is a presence, a loving presence that brings somebody back to that part of themselves that they already have in them so that they can rest inside of that, knowing that their body will come back to balance, their mind will come back to balance through that part of them that's already the truth of who they are. So part of it is I like to introduce people to themselves in a way that they can't help but fall in love. And I believe there's healing in that.
Such a beautiful image to imagine falling in love with yourself. I know that so many people who are struggling with their bodies, in the context of a wellness journey or a healing journey, can get pretty disgusted with themselves and pretty down on their bodies, pretty frustrated. So I can imagine that's kind of a hard gap to sort of cross for a lot of people in their minds. What would you say to someone who's sort of at that place right now and listening and saying, yeah, this body has failed me. I'm not ready to kind of come to peace with that. What would you tell them?
I say that's okay. It's okay to be in anguish about your experience, and it's okay to be frustrated about your experience. There's nothing wrong in what you feel. And it could be hurt, it could be anger, it could be fear, it could be disappointment, and it could be even hopelessness. And I know from experience, having been in a body that I myself have not appreciated all the time, and in fact despised at times, that none of it's permanent. Being in hate with self isn't permanent. And even being in love with yourself isn't permanent. It's a matter of being present to what is. And so there are times when I'm present to what I am, and I can feel peace and joy. And then there are times when I'm present to what I am, and I do have judgment. I do have wishings and longings for it to be other than what it is. And so either way, there's nothing wrong with you about that. And so if we just come to presence for what is as it is first, then we have choice, because then we can actually get some perspective about it. As long as we are in a state of really tight, pressured presence, we're not creative and we don't have any options. We're very limited. And that's exactly what life force energy is not about. Life is all about potential. Life is all about possibility. Life is all about reaching for the sun and digging for the water just so that it can be. And life is no different inside of you. All it loves is to just be you. It relishes the experience of being you just the way you are. And so sometimes our bodies are unhealthy. Just like a blade of grass that didn't get enough sun, it's a little wilted and having a hard time. Life still loves being that blade of grass, just as much as it still loves being you. And you are more than your body. You have a body. I have a body. And sometimes it aches and sometimes it's happy. Sometimes it's stressed and sometimes it's relaxed. All of that is true. And I'm still me, which is that bigger part of myself that's here in life to experience. And so when I can come to that experience with compassion, with grace, it gives me more fortitude. And so for those of us that really are upset about the circumstances, that's okay. You have a right to be angry. You have a right to be frustrated. And you also have a right to be loved just the way you are. And that's what I offer. Unconditional love, just the way you are, because it's innocent. This whole experience is very innocent. And we're all doing the best we can. And we do have a little bit of a blueprint, but it comes from the soul and not the mind. And so when we can rest in the mind and relax into the soul experience of ourselves, we are enough. We have enough. And we have what it takes to go through this whole life experience as a human.
There's so much in what you said, Summer, and I'm just deciding where to go, because I feel like there's a lot of points in there that people might want to grapple a little bit more with. But first, I wonder if you wouldn't share with us a little bit about your own journey and what brought you to this place, this sort of understanding of what this is all about.
When I was young, I was raped. And so I came into this life with a belief system that I wasn't worth anything and that I wasn't of any value and I had nothing to offer and that I was useless. So I did go through a series of depression, of suicidal ideation, and I wasn't really interested in this whole thing called life. But I did end up meeting a Native American medicine man. I fell in love, I married him, and walking by his side for 13 years, I came to a new understanding about what it is that I'm even doing here on earth. Why bother with this life thing? And the truth is we're all just love. And we're all just here to love, just the way we are. And so on the soul level, we're all already one. There is no separation from my form to your form. But as life expresses itself in form, it comes with that duality of being an individual and therefore having a personality or an ego. And so I've come to, on this journey, a sense of balance or peace or resilience about how I am a soul in this human form, and then how I am as a human doing the best I can in this thing we call life in a modern society. Being a soul doesn't mean that I'm absolved from figuring out how to pay my bills and put food on the table and stay out of the doctor's office. All of that's still real. But when I know that I have the soul to support me in this journey, how I feel as I go through it means that I'm not alone. I'm always connected and I'm always enough, just as I am. There's no performance. There's no expectations. There's no have tos or shoulds.
Yeah. So again, I think I'm imagining where people might be, and the gap for me seems pretty far. Like, what are the steps? What are the next steps people might take if they were hoping to cultivate some of this trust that they are enough, but they're just not there yet, or that they are love, or that this is all perfect? You know, how might they begin to kind of try that on for size in a way that doesn't maybe feel so far away?
So you're not going to find it in your mind, and you're not going to find it in your thoughts, and you're not going to find it in every belief or ideal that you've ever held or been given. You're going to find it in your heart. You're going to find it in your gut. And through those two places inside of you, it's a different language. It's a kind of experience that we almost have to leave behind the intellect to start to decipher what it is that it's communicating to us. And so the beginning is just allowing your attention and your intention to drop down from the mind into the body. Even if there's pain there, it's okay to be present to it as it is. And so when we get present to the body and the experience of the body and the experience of the emotions and how they are felt within the body, just being present to those is actually a form of digestion and assimilation. And so that they don't have to be held separate from. That creates stress in our experience. But when we become present to our physical and emotional experience, we actually get access to new information. And this information can be integrated into how we are. And so the initial experience might be from numb and resistance to anguish and sorrow, to relief and grief, to hope and joy. It's like a cycle that we all go through almost every minute, if not every second of every day. We have access to all of our experience all at once. It's not either or. But being present to it is the beginning. And so sometimes we need somebody to be with us as we go to this place that seems scary for us. And this is where we reach out to community, or we reach out to specialists who have been there and have the fortitude and the compassion to be present with you in that space. You don't have to go there alone. In fact, if there's ever been trauma, it's healthiest to go there with somebody so that integration and healing can happen through the presencing of another, through the relationship of another, where unconditional love is available, so that this part of us can have a new experience in the part of us that we've been holding off from. And so when we can be present to the parts of us that we've been most terrified of, with somebody that brings unconditional love along into that space, it heals it and it integrates it. So it's like a form of digesting the experience. It's a way of resolving karma in this lifetime instead of putting it off and holding off experience.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, and I fully agree with everything. And I want to bring up this this interesting paradox that I think many people will have experienced when they go to therapists or physicians who have been trained to hold very firm boundaries around their, their relationship with that patient. The words love rarely creep into the conversation, certainly not unconditional love. Yeah. Even though doctors and therapists might love their patients, they would never, typically never say that. I mean, I break all sorts of rules, and that's one of them that I break personally, because I think it's what you're saying is so true and important. We, cultivating that therapeutic relationship, which I think really means holding space from a place of unconditional love for someone to grow and heal and see their own wounds and move through things at their own pace, is so key. And yet, in the traditional medical establishment, at least where I grew up and trained, that's not what you do. So how might people begin to find this in a way that is safe and protected and doesn't break boundaries that they need to hold firm?
So this is an incredibly dynamic and abundant world that we live in. And so we have our Western medicine ways, which are very scientific, very valuable and life-saving. They're also very sterile. And so because we do live in a dynamic, abundant world, you are not limited to only that as a resource for your health and well-being. An example would be you might have a friend that you love dearly, that when things are hard and you don't know what to do, you call and they have a basket that you can unload your basket into, and they hold space with you. They're not trained. They're not a professional with all these letters behind their name, but they're trustworthy and they're good. And you know that and you depend on that. This is exactly what this world is offering. There's 7 billion people on this planet. Surely someone out there can help you. And so they might come from a different culture with a different belief system, or they might come from a different training or a different background or a different perspective. They might come from a different religion or a different truth. All I know is when you come to that place inside of you that really has a good sense of yes and no, when you follow that, when you really get attuned to what is your yes and what is your no, you'll never be led wrong. And you'll always be guided to the one that really can support you where you are now. And this isn't to say that we have to stay with that one forever. We evolve, we transform, we grow. That's the essence of life. Life is here to grow and thrive. That means not being in one space. And that's not being defined by any one concept. And so we might come across somebody in our path that helps us where we are, and we might outgrow them. And so then we continue on and we might find somebody else that is supportive and helpful. So there are times when we might go to a doctor. I was diagnosed with precancer of my cervix. And so I did go to the medical doctors and I did have surgeries because that was what was going to save my life. And then I also went to shamans and therapists of a more spiritual background because that was going to save my relationship to myself. And so it's just a matter of being really discerning for what's true for you. And if something feels good and true, okay. And if something doesn't feel good and true, okay. We all have the right to say yes, and we all have the right to say no. And it doesn't matter what is being offered to us or what they believe the value of it is. We have our own truth, and only you can know what is aligned for you. If it's unclear, that's where somebody like me comes in handy because I can help you find that clarity, deciphering that language within. But if it's already clear for you, then go, be, and live.
Yeah, it's such good advice. And I'm also aware that so many of my patients, so many people, I think, get sort of stuck in fear. Yeah. And I think there's nothing like fear to really cloud your intuitive knowing. That's my personal experience. And so, people need, I think, tools to work through that. Do you have any quick and dirty, break through the fear so you can get clear on your next steps, little tricks you might teach us?
Well, the fun part about fear is 99.9% of it is our imagination. Most of it's not even real. And so the first step I would offer is to get really present to this very moment now, just the very minuteness of the now. And in this really precise moment of now, take stock. Because when we get present to now and take stock of what is, there's no time pressure. There's no urgency. And urgency is not helpful when it comes to finding clarity. That pressure of time Doesn't serve anybody in any form, in any way. I think we're taught through our school systems that the time pressure is motivating. It's not. That's really a great misunderstanding. So the moment we let go of time pressure, that we have to make this decision now, and we get present to the now and we create time space through presence, in this moment now, I might have a question to be answered. Do I do this? Do I not do this? Or what do I do about this? But when we get present to that space, we can actually hear new information that lets us know yes or no. Or yes, but this way. Or no, but including this. There's no one way. There's just whatever is true. So the way to find that, even with fear, is to first acknowledge, in this moment, I'm okay. I might have whatever it is that we have, but right here and now, I am okay. I am safe, and I have choices. And when we can recognize that we have choices, that fear is an option, that's a choice, we could also hear what other choices are also available simultaneously. And so when we can get to that place of clarity of mind and clarity of body presence, there might be pain, there might be medical decisions to be made, but truly the urgency is made up. And an example would be, let's say you're driving your car and you're driving along, somebody pulls into your lane. Before you think about it, you've either changed lanes, hit the brakes, or sped up because you've just even maneuvered your way out of the circumstance. That's before you thought about it. So when time is of the essence, you'll do whatever there is to do to take good care of you. That's instinct. Our bodies are set up for that, and we can trust that. And we do trust that because we didn't even have to think about it. It's just, it happens. We do that all the time in so many ways. It's when we are in those circumstances where we think that there's a time pressure. That's an illusion. Somebody else might be telling us there's a time pressure. That's also an illusion. You have all the time you need to make the choice that you want for yourself based on an aligned internal truth. And so making that time space to get present to it, to hear it, to understand it, to decipher it, it might look like hours or days or weeks, but I sincerely, I really mean this when I say it's seconds. And an example would be, you might ask me a question, and I'm speaking from my heart, so I don't know, but my heart does. And so the time it takes for me to take a breath and feel into what is to be said might feel like an hour up here. And there could be judgments and criticisms about what that might look like or feel like or mean or what that would offer you. But what I know to be true is it's just a second. And then my heart says what there is to be said. All of you have the same luxury available to you. It's built into us. I'm just letting you know you have permission to use it.
It's beautiful, and it's a wonderful permission to grant us all. I'm still sort of ruminating on this image you created of, when we're not thinking about it, and when time really is of the essence, like we have to pull a child out from, in front of a car, for example, we know what to do and we do it, and we learn to trust that. And it's when our thinking brain gets involved for these more longer term kind of processes that we start to doubt our knowing about what is right for us. But how reassuring to know that in the moment of choosing between life and death, our bodies always choose life.
Yeah.
And I never really thought of that before, but it's very important. A lot of people are grappling with this. They're really on the fence about, life is very painful, or I'm a very sensitive person and life is, the physical world is too demanding, or this illness has really crushed me and I don't know that I ever want to move forward anymore, like truly ambivalent about it. And yet when given the choice, your body is choosing life.
Always.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the nature of it. And so this is where more metaphysical theory comes into play, which is, so we are the soul self, which is geared towards experience, and it's a very neutral intention. And then we have this human self that is geared towards thriving in life. That's also kind of neutral, because it's not really worried about what happens. It just wants to thrive. And then we come to this middle ground of our ego trying to make meaning out of everything. And so when we come to this experience in a physical form that is uncomfortable or difficult or painful, our ego starts to make belief systems around that, given everything it's ever heard and seen and understood, and what it creates out of its own sense of morality, right and wrong. But the egoic morality is just slightly different than the soul's truth. And it's not to say that it's not useful, it is. It's a beautiful tool as we move through life as a human form. It's just not the only tool. And so when we have the soul to also support, sustain, and guide us in this human experience, having a physical form that is painful or sensitive or difficult, there's no mistakes in life. There's no mistakes. There's nothing wrong. It's just given the circumstances, now what becomes available in the way of experience. And so that time of cancer scare for me, I had the choice of not having a surgery. And the difficult part of choosing that was I was in my late 30s and hadn't yet had children. And so this surgery was really the decision maker. Do I want to be a mother or not? And I've always been somebody who was thought she was born to be a mother. And then I had to make this choice that determined, I guess I'm just not going to be a mother from natural birth. Okay. Was it fun? No. Did my ego like it? Absolutely not, because now it had a different sense of identity than it ever did before. And it took a little while to reconcile that. But the truth is, if we're all one, then everyone is my child to be loved. Just as I myself am my own child to be loved. And so I'm not motherless and I'm not childless, because I'm both simultaneously, to be nurtured and nurturing. And so in order for me to come to that understanding or that truth or that way of being, I couldn't just rely on that part of myself that's very intellectual and theoretical. It was helpful knowing that given my choices, that's what helped me to make the decision to, yes, go ahead and have the surgery, because that was the smartest thing to do. And then this is what let me make the choice to have the surgery, because I am not my motherhood or not motherhood. I'm more than that. And I can live from that, and I can live through that. The same is true for every one of you. You have your intellect and you have everything else also to utilize when you make choices, when you make decisions, and as you move through transformation of beliefs and identities.
I agree with that. And I think one of the hardest things about that process, which I think is mandatory if you're really going to come into full alignment with your path forward, is figuring out how to host that conversation really between the ego and the soul, right? They're often working at what seems to be cross purposes, and they have different goals. And so how do you set up space? How do you invite that conversation so that it's effective and ultimately brings everyone to the same place?
Well, what I know to be true is that both of them are right, and both of them are useful, and both of them are yours. And so first, let's come to the space where nothing's wrong with you, nothing's broken, and you have everything you need. And so there are times when we might make this almost as if it's like the king or the queen. And what I know to be true is if we let this be the king or the queen, and this to be a tool to be utilized or to be in service of, there's a sense of alignment that comes. So first, let's acknowledge that we have both. And if you're not sure, just notice the different experience that you have when your attention is in your head, in your ruminating thoughts, and when your attention drops down into your body and has a different experience. You have both. And when we get present to that, there are both available, then we can start working on what does it mean to have them, and what does it mean to live with them, and then what does it mean to start to integrate them, where they bring balance and support to one another. In this life experience, we are soul energy, and soul energy is formless. It's life energy expressing itself through the form. So the only way that life can create is with form. And that's why it takes on form, is through experience and through creation, it evolves itself. And so we take on these bodies in whatever form they are, so that it can continue to create, so that it can continue to express. And so we might be somebody who was born without hands. So what would that look like? Well, we're more than our hands. So there are many people on this earth in many forms, in many designs, in many colors, all of which brings an expression of the gift of life itself. And so how that expression is expressed through the form is unique to every one of us. But it's all from the same source, the truth, the unconditional, universal, loving truth of existence. And so when you know that, you have both inside of you. The egoic ability to navigate this duality of this human world, and the soulful truth of what you're here to do in the first place, then there's nothing to stop you from being all that you were ever meant to be.
I love this image of both oneness of all and an incredible diversity of experience and vehicles through which to manifest life. And I'm also aware that for many people, that'll be a new concept, or at least one that they haven't fully embodied. Will you share with us a little bit about what in your journey led you to this kind of knowing of what it is and what we're all about?
So because of my childhood, my teenagehood was dark, and I really had no zest for life. Like, this part was in full control, and it was completely doomed. all that it saw was not good. And somebody invited me to a sweat lodge. And I thought, what could I lose? You know, maybe that's the place I'll go die. And so typically in a sweat lodge, somebody new would actually tend fire and not even enter. Or if they entered, they would only go in for 1 round instead of 4. And when I came to the sweat lodge, I ended up entering and never left for all 4 rounds, even though the door would open and I was invited to leave if I chose. And so from the very start of that whole experience, I became aware of 2 parts of me. There was a part of me that was insisting, screaming that I run because I was going to die. It was so hot inside of there, it was insane.
Hold on. So even though there was a little part of you kind of hoping that this might be the end of you, I just want to point out that your innate cells and your body were like,
nope,
this is not conducive to survival, I'm out.
Yeah,
Okay.
Absolutely. Okay. But there was another part of me that for the first time in my life, I became present to. And this is the part that I call my soul. And that is the part that had decided it was home and it was never going to leave. And so I spent all 4 rounds wrestling between these 2. Which one was true? Which one was real? And so every time they opened the door, I knew they were going to ask me, would you like to get out? And this part of me was like, yes, scream, run, go. And what came out of my mouth is, no, thank you. And it was so calm, and it was so present. It was so true that this took months to reconcile why I would let myself be in that experience when it was certain it would die. And that was the beginning of my journey of recognizing I'm more than my thoughts. And they're not always true, because there's more information available to my experience. And what would happen if I actually lived from that? And so what has happened is I've gone through many, they call it a dark night of the soul. Well, the soul doesn't have a dark night. It's a dark night of the ego. I've had many dark nights of the ego. And it brings a sense of balance between having an ego to utilize, it's your character, it's your personality, but also having a soul self to be a foundation with which to operate from. And that soul self is unconditional love. So I can be in this world of judgments and dualities and difficulties and struggles with a basis of I'm always okay. And no matter the circumstances, I will be okay.
Yeah. Earlier you said, both the mind and the heart, the ego and the soul are always right. And I want to just call attention to that again, because in that moment, the interpretation that your brain gave wasn't actually accurate. You weren't going to physically perish, right?
Right.
But isn't it true that at some level, some part of you had to die?
Yes. Yeah, and it knew that. So that's why I say it's not wrong. But as long as we have some semblance of context to put it in, then we can be really present to the experience of the ego dying and have compassion for that.
Ego hospice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that story with us.
Thank you.
You've left me with a lot to think about, and I'm sure the same is true for those listening. Are there any pieces that we've missed? Anything that you'd want to say from your heart to this viewing audience of people who might be well, but struggling with some aspect of staying that way or wanting to get healthier, or might be pretty debilitated and not sure if they want to live right now?
There's a saying that Louise Hayes has from the very beginning of her journey. And that is that this experience and everything within it is exactly right for you. And so if we start from that, what is as it is perfectly right for you. And if we come to that truth with the understanding that we have everything we need to be able to navigate, to integrate, to assimilate, and to bring value through what all that you are experiencing is, then you've been set up beautifully for a lovely life of learning, of experience, of growth. There's not a single one of us. If you are alive, you've been through hardship. Not one of us gets out of this without that. That is how we grow. So the size of our hardship determines on how much we were willing to grow. And so if it feels big, or it looks big, or it seems big, that's because in order to grow, we have to get to the edge of ourselves, or what we perceive as ourselves, and step beyond. That's growing. We have to get really comfortable and easygoing in the not knowing, in the unknown, in those spaces that might seem dark. And it's really just a space that we haven't shown love into yet. And so the invitation is to look at any place within you that might be a shadow and just shine love inside. And what you'll see is nothing to be afraid of and everything to be embraced, because within there are the gems of you. It might look vulnerable, and in the first experience of it might feel vulnerable. But the truth is, when we be vulnerable, that is a true strength. And you can live from that. It's not a weakness, it's a power. It's just more humble.
I love the way you put that, Summer. So if somebody wanted to be in your loving therapeutic embrace and take a next step to work with you, do you have something that they could find, some way to find you, or some program, or some
Yeah. I'm developing some guided imageries on a YouTube channel, which is under Summer MacCool. You can also go to summermaccool.com, which is one of my websites that can bring you to my blog. And once a month, I just offer love.
Wait, what does that look like?
Well, sometimes it's poetry, sometimes it's just a love letter to you, to the soul of you, and sometimes it's a video offering a guided imagery or a prayer.
Who doesn't need that? That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this time. Is there anything else that we missed?
No, thank you. It's been an honor to be with you. I'm so grateful.
You too. Thank you, Summer.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Healing Grove podcast. If you liked it, please be sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to deepen your experience further, consider grabbing a copy of the Healing Grove Playbook. With journal prompts for this podcast and 41 others, it's the perfect place to record your learnings, keep track of the tools you explore, and reflect on your own experience. Finally, it's important to mention that even though I am a doctor, nothing you hear on this podcast, whether from myself or my guests, constitutes medical advice. Any intervention you try should always be discussed with and supervised by a trusted member of your own healing team. Thanks for listening, and see you next time in the Healing Grove.